In July of 1946, a camera photographed a wall of white water a mile high rising out of a Pacific lagoon. At its base, arranged in neat rows like toys in a bathtub, sit the black silhouettes of warships. And inside the wall of water itself, there is a dark, vertical shape. And for more than 50 years, captions in books and museums said that shape was a 26,000-ton American battleship, standing on her bow, being swallowed whole. The truth about that shape is stranger than the caption. It explains something bigger, which is why an entire fleet of the Second World War's most storied warships is still lying on the bottom of that lagoon today, 80 years later, visited only by sharks and scuba divers. America put them there on purpose. This was not a fleet gathered for war. It was a fleet assembled to be executed. In the summer of 1946, more than 90 vessels rode at anchor in the lagoon of Bikini Atoll, and nearly every one of them was a veteran. Consider the battleship Nevada. On the morning of Pearl Harbor, she was the only battleship in the anchorage that managed to get underway, steaming down the channel through the bombs with her band having just played the national anthem. And when the Japanese swarmed her, her crew beached her deliberately rather than let her block the harbor for everyone else. She came back from that. She came back to pour shellfire onto Utah Beach on D-Day morning, onto Cherbourg, onto Iwo Jima, onto Okinawa. She is the only battleship that was present at both Pearl Harbor and Normandy. Her reward in 1946 was to be anchored at the center of the target array and painted blaze orange from bow to stern, with white gun barrels so that a bombardier 5 miles up could not possibly miss her. The United States Navy took the survivor of Pearl Harbor and painted her into a bullseye. The Nevada was not even the most beloved ship in the lagoon. That was the Saratoga. She was one of the United States Navy's first 2 fleet carriers, a converted battlecruiser so beloved that her crews called her Sister Sara. Japanese submarines torpedoed her twice, and she came back both times. Her aircraft sank a Japanese carrier at the Eastern Solomons and mauled a cruiser force at Rabaul. Off Iwo Jima in February of 1945, flying night fighters, she was hit by 5 kamikazes and bombs within about 3 minutes. 123 of her men died that evening, and she was recovering aircraft again before midnight. When the war ended, she carried nearly 30,000 veterans home across the Pacific, more than any other single ship. Then the Navy that had repaired her after every wound in the war sailed her to Bikini and moored her next to a bomb, and anchored among the Americans 2 prizes. The Japanese battleship Nagato, once the flagship of Admiral Yamamoto. Be precise about her because careless tellings are not. Nagato never attacked Pearl Harbor. She never left home waters for the raid. She was the deck the order came from, the ship where the signal to climb Mount Nitaka, the execute order for the attack, went out, and the ship where Yamamoto stood when the words Tora Tora came back across more than 3,000 miles of ocean. By August of 1945, she was the only Japanese battleship still afloat, and an American crew nursed her leaking hull across the Pacific to Bikini, so she could be there for the end. Beside her, the German heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, the ship that had stood in line with the Bismarck in the Denmark Strait on the morning they blew apart HMS Hood. Survivors of everything their war could do gathered in one quiet lagoon to find out what the next war would do. The reason was an argument. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had ended one war and started a question, which was whether navies now meant anything at all. If one bomb could do that to a city, what was a fleet? The Navy needed to know, and perhaps needed the answer to come out a particular way. The man in charge, Vice Admiral William Blandy, named the Operation Crossroads because, he said, sea power, air power, and perhaps humanity itself stood at one. 42,000 men sailed for Bikini. They brought more than 200 ships, 700 cameras, and roughly half the world's supply of motion picture film. one frame of which would become the most misread photograph of the atomic age. And before any of it could begin, a Commodore stood in front of the 167 people who actually lived on Bikini Atoll after church on a Sunday and asked them to leave their home for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. Their leader, King Judah, gave an answer that deserves to be remembered. Exactly. "We will go," he said, believing that everything is in the hands of God. Within a month, they were gone. They believed they were coming back. The first bomb fell on the 1st of July 1946 at 9 in the morning. A B-29 called Dave's Dream dropped a plutonium bomb of the Nagasaki type, 23 kilotons, set to burst above the fleet. It missed. The orange-painted Nevada, the literal bullseye, was still afloat at the aim point, scorched and radioactive, but afloat because the bomb detonated 700 yards away, over open water. 5 ships sank. 2 transports went down almost at once. 2 destroyers within hours, and a Japanese cruiser the next day. 5 out of more than 90. The world's press, who had been promised the apocalypse, looked at a lagoon still full of floating warships and wrote the bomb off. Newspapers openly wondered whether the atom had been oversold. A pig, number 311, was found swimming in the lagoon the day after the blast, supposedly having escaped from a doomed cruiser, and became a national celebrity, the swimming survivor of the atomic age. She got fat and famous at the National Zoo. Decades later, an investigation concluded she had probably never been aboard the target ship at all. She was likely absent without leave the whole time. Even the miracle pig was a myth, a caption, like the one on the photograph. But the deeper myth was the lesson the world took from Abel, which is that a fleet could ride out an atomic bomb. 3 weeks later, the second test corrected the record. Baker was different. It went off on the 25th of July at 8:35 in the morning, 90 feet under the surface of the lagoon, slung beneath a landing ship in the middle of the target array. What happens in the next few seconds has never been seen on Earth. The lagoon itself detonates. Roughly 1 million tons of water, by some official counts 2 million, rise as a hollow column 6,000 feet tall and 2,000 feet across, with walls of solid water 300 feet thick. The landing ship above the bomb is not sunk. It is erased. No identifiable piece of it was ever found. The battleship Arkansas, a ship that predated the First World War and had bombarded Omaha Beach on D-Day, is moored a couple of 100 yards away. When the spray clears, she is simply gone, crushed and driven under in seconds. And this is where that famous photograph comes in, because in the rising wall of water, there is that dark vertical streak, and generations were told it was the Arkansas, upended like a bath toy. Physicists at Los Alamos finally ran the problem properly. The shock lasted less than 1,000th of a second, far too briefly to lift a 26,000-ton battleship out of the sea, and her wreck lies upside down in 180 feet of water, her blast side hull crushed inward. She was driven under and rolled, not thrown into the sky. The dark shape in the photograph is, most likely, boiler soot, blasted out of her funnels in her final instant. The most famous image of a battleship dying is probably a picture of her exhaling. But the column was not the weapon. What the column did next was, when those million tons of water fell back into the lagoon, they threw out a ring of radioactive mist 900 feet tall, rolling outward across the anchorage at 60 miles an hour. A wave of fog that looked, in the official description, like the mist at the base of a great waterfall. Within 4 minutes, it was 3.5 miles across. It rolled over the fleet and painted every deck, every gun, every rope and vent and hatch with fission products and unburned plutonium. Los Alamos scientists had warned before the test that the lagoon water would become, in their words, a witch's brew. It did. The blast of Baker sank 8 ships, 10 by some counts. The mist condemned all the rest. The official evaluation board would later write that the surviving ships had become radioactive stoves and would have burned all living things aboard them with invisible and painless but deadly radiation. The Saratoga took 7.5 hours to die, and her death broke a pattern that had held for the whole war. She is afloat, settling slowly by the stern, her funnel folded across the flight deck. In 1942, in 1945, this is the moment when the tugs and the damage control parties and the escorts come alongside and save Sister Sara one more time. At Bikini, nobody comes, nothing is burning, and no enemy is shooting. The ship herself will kill anyone who approaches. So the men who rowed her through the whole Pacific War stand on other decks and watch her go down alone, untouched, in calm water, on a sunny afternoon. And 5 nights later, the pattern completed itself. The Nagato, Yamamoto's flagship, had been listing slowly for days, and no one could go aboard to save her either, and no one particularly wanted to. On the night of the 29th of July, she was there, and at dawn on the 30th, she was not. The last battleship of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the ship Pearl Harbor was ordered from, sank in the dark with no one watching. The most filmed fleet in history let its most symbolic ship die off camera. What followed was worse than the tests. The Navy still hoped to save the surviving hulls, so in the first 6 days after Baker, 4,900 sailors were sent aboard the contaminated ships to clean them. They scrubbed the decks with mops, brushes, soap, water, and lye. Most of them worked in shorts. The Geiger counters of 1946 could not even see the alpha radiation of the plutonium they were scrubbing. Support ships anchored in the lagoon ran their evaporators and made their drinking water from lagoon seawater. Nothing worked, short of sandblasting steel down to bare metal. The man who saw it clearly was Colonel Stafford Warren, the Manhattan Project's chief medical officer, the man who had surveyed Hiroshima. He spent 2 weeks telling the fleet's commanders that the cleanup was futile and that his monitors could not protect the men doing it. Then, on the 10th of August, he puts a single photograph on Admiral Blandy's desk. It is a picture of a fish from the lagoon, an image the fish had taken of itself, because it was radioactive enough to expose the film it was laid on. A self-X-ray of a fish, Warren wrote home afterward, did the trick. Blandy looks at it and calls a halt to everything. The third test was cancelled outright because there was no fleet clean enough to test it on. One of Warren's radiation monitors summed up his boss's achievement in a sentence the Navy cannot have enjoyed. He was the only Army colonel who ever sank a Navy flotilla. The executions dragged on for years afterward, scattered quietly across the Pacific. The Prinz Eugen, survivor of the Denmark Strait, went first. At Kwajalein Atoll, she developed a leak that no dock worker could safely go aboard to fix. And just before Christmas of 1946, she rolled over in shallow water, where her stern and one propeller shaft still break the surface today. The Navy towed the Nevada, too contaminated to keep, off Hawaii in 1948 to be sunk as a gunnery target, and the survivor of Pearl Harbor absorbed shellfire from an Iowa-class battleship and 2 cruisers and still refused to go down, until aerial torpedoes finally sent her down. Her wreck was found in 2020, nearly 3 miles down, upside down on the abyssal plain. The carrier Independence, burned out by Able, left San Francisco under tow in 1951, loaded with drums of nuclear waste, and was scuttled near the Farallon Islands. Of more than 90 target ships, only 9 were ever judged clean enough to scrap. The rest went to the bottom, one quiet disposal at a time. The bomb had not defeated the fleet in an afternoon, the way the headlines wanted. It had done something the war never managed. It made the ships untouchable, and a ship no one can touch is already a wreck, wherever she happens to be floating. And the 167 people who went believing everything was in the hands of God. They were taken to an uninhabited atoll 1/6 the size of home, and it could not feed them. Within 2 years, an anthropologist found them eating a gruel of flour and water, and they were moved again and again, finally to a small island with no lagoon that they came to call the Prison Island. In 1968, the American government declared Bikini safe and let families return. The data was wrong. The cesium from the tests had climbed into the soil, into the groundwater, into the coconuts and breadfruit that are the entire subsistence diet of the atoll, and after the returning islanders' own bodies began registering it, everyone was evacuated a second time, in 1978. That is the cruelest fact of Bikini today. And it is also the answer to the question this file opened with. Divers visit the lagoon every summer because visiting is genuinely safe. They drop onto the Saratoga's flight deck at 90 feet, swim beneath Nagato's 4 screws, and rise past gun turrets furred with coral. You can swim at Bikini. You cannot live there because you cannot eat there. The water forgave, the food chain did not, so the fleet stays where it fell. Raising the ships was all but impossible in 1946, because they would have poisoned every hand that touched them. And by the time anyone could have touched them, there was nothing left worth raising. Ships that had survived everything the war could do, Pearl Harbor, Normandy, the Denmark Strait, 5 kamikazes in 3 minutes, were killed by something no armor plate in the world could stop, and were left on the bottom because even their executioners could not safely bury them. The war ended in 1945. At Bikini, it is still lying on the lagoon floor, slowly leaking oil in the blue dark, still there. This has been Nick's World War II archive. If you want the war's leftovers documented with receipts instead of rumors, subscribe. There is always more of what the war left behind to dig up.